It was a busy afternoon at the city's most popular restaurant, Royal Spoon. Soft music played in the background, and the sound of glasses clinking filled the air. Waiters moved fast between tables, serving fancy dishes and smiling at wealthy customers. A young waiter named Kyle stood near the entrance, fixing his tie. He liked working here. The restaurant only welcomed the best customers. People who wore suits, gold watches, and smelled like money. Then, the door opened slowly. An old black man walked in. He wore simple, clean clothes. His shirt was faded, his shoes were dusty, and he walked with a slight limp. He looked around the restaurant quietly, as if searching for something. Kyle's smile disappeared. He quickly walked toward the old man and stopped him near the door. "Excuse me, sir," Kyle said, trying to stay polite. "Can I help you?" The old man nodded gently. "Yes, I'd like a table for one, please." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a reservation?" The old man shook his head. "No, but I've been here before." Kyle looked him up and down. To him, this man did not belong in such a place. The expensive carpet, the golden lights, the well-dressed people, none of it matched this stranger. "I'm sorry, sir," Kyle said in a louder voice. "We're full right now. You should try a place down the street." The old man looked confused. "But I see empty tables," he said, pointing. Kyle grew irritated. Some customers had started to look over. He didn't want a scene. "Sir, I'm asking you to leave," Kyle said, more firmly now. "This is not the place for walk-ins." The old man didn't argue. He just sighed and turned slowly, walking toward the door. Everyone was watching now. Some whispered. Some laughed. Just then, the door opened again. A tall man in a black suit entered. His walk was strong. His eyes were sharp. He looked like someone important. The man looked around once, then walked straight toward the old man. "Mr. Henry," he said warmly, reaching out to shake his hand. "We've been expecting you." The restaurant went silent. Kyle froze. His face went pale. The man in the suit turned to Kyle. "Are you the one who greeted Mr. Henry just now?" Kyle nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, sir. I didn't know." The man didn't smile. "You didn't know who he was?" Kyle looked down. "No, sir. I thought he was just." "Just what?" the man asked sharply. Kyle didn't answer. The suited man turned back to Mr. Henry. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please come with me. Your table is ready." Everyone watched as the old man was led to the best table in the house, right by the big window, with a view of the city skyline. Kyle stood still, feeling embarrassed and confused. Who was this old man? Why was he so important? And why had the owner of the restaurant treated him with such respect? The questions hung in the air like smoke. The other guests whispered. One man said, "I think I've seen him before." Another woman added, "He looks familiar." Kyle walked back to the front desk, still shaken. He kept looking at Mr. Henry, who now sat calmly at the table, sipping a glass of water. Then the man in the suit stood up and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I want you all to know who this man is. Mr. Henry is not just a guest. He's the reason this restaurant even exists." Gasps filled the room. Kyle's eyes went wide. The man continued, "Years ago, Mr. Henry donated the land on which this restaurant was built. He fed hundreds of hungry people right here before we ever opened. He gave everything, without asking for anything in return." Mr. Henry looked down, humble and quiet. "And today," the man said, "we honor him." The whole room stood up and clapped. Everyone, except Kyle. He stood frozen in shame, realizing how badly he had judged someone just because of how they looked. Mr. Henry never said a word about what had happened. He just gave a small, kind smile. But inside, Kyle knew. He would never forget this moment. The restaurant had turned quiet after the applause. People looked at Mr. Henry with new eyes now, A few even smiled at him, trying to show respect. But Mr. Henry stayed calm. He didn't seem angry. He didn't even look at Kyle. Kyle, on the other hand, felt like the floor would open and swallow him whole. He stood behind the front desk, his hands shaking. His heart was pounding fast. He kept thinking about how he treated Mr. Henry. His words echoed in his mind. "This is not the place for people like you." He didn't mean to sound rude, but now he realized it didn't matter what he meant. What mattered was how he made the old man feel. The man in the black suit came back and sat with Mr. Henry. They laughed softly and talked like old friends. Soon, the waiter brought the best meal on the menu. It was not even listed. It was made special, only for important guests. Kyle watched all this and felt smaller and smaller. He asked another waiter, "Who is that man in the suit?" The other waiter whispered, "That's Mr. Clark, the owner of the whole restaurant chain. That old man, he's his mentor." Kyle felt his throat dry up. Mentor? Yes. Mr. Henry helped his father during bad times. Mr. Clark told us before that if Mr. Henry ever comes here, we should treat him like royalty. Kyle's knees felt weak. Now, the staff was whispering. Everyone had seen what Kyle had done. Some were judging him. Some just shook their heads in silence. Kyle could not take it anymore. He walked slowly toward Mr. Henry's table. "Excuse me, sir," Kyle said in a quiet voice. "May I speak to you for a moment?" Mr. Henry looked up. His face was peaceful, calm. "Of course," he said kindly. Kyle bent his head. "I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. I didn't know who you were. I judged you. And I was wrong." There was a long silence. Everyone nearby watched, listening. Then Mr. Henry asked, "Would you have treated me better if you did know who I was?" Kyle looked up slowly. "No," Mr. Henry said gently. "That's not how respect works." Kyle's eyes filled with tears. "You're right, sir. I was wrong. I don't have an excuse." Mr. Henry didn't shout. He didn't humiliate Kyle. Instead, he said softly, "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what you do after the mistake." Mr. Clark, sitting beside him, nodded. "That's what Mr. Henry taught me years ago. When my father had nothing, Mr. Henry gave him food and clothes. He gave him hope. And he told me once, 'People forget what you say, but they never forget how you make them feel.'" The whole restaurant heard those words, and something changed in the room. People who once laughed now looked ashamed. Those who ignored Mr. Henry now wanted to learn from him. Kyle wiped his eyes and said, "Sir, I want to do something to make this right." Mr. Henry smiled gently. "Then meet me tomorrow. I'll be at the old shelter on Maple Street. Come see what real service looks like." Kyle nodded, grateful. "I'll be there, I promise." As Kyle walked back, a woman at a nearby table touched his arm and whispered, "You were brave to say sorry in front of everyone. That matters too." Kyle gave a small smile, but deep down he knew he had a long way to go to fix his mistake. Meanwhile, Mr. Henry ate his meal slowly, enjoying each bite. But in his mind, he wasn't thinking about food. He was remembering the hungry children he used to feed right here, years ago, when there was no restaurant, just a small soup kitchen under a broken roof. And now, this fancy place stood in its place. He didn't want power. He didn't want praise. All he wanted was dignity. And finally, after so many years, the world was starting to see the truth. The next morning, Kyle stood nervously in front of an old, worn-down building on Maple Street. The sign above said, "Hope Haven Shelter." It didn't look like much: peeling paint, broken windows, and a shaky door. But as Kyle stepped inside, he felt something different. It was warm, not just from the heaters, but from the feeling in the air. People smiled as they worked. Volunteers passed out food, folded clothes, and cleaned without being told. There was laughter, music, and soft voices saying thank you. And in the middle of it all was Mr. Henry. He wasn't wearing a suit, just his usual simple clothes, a plain apron, and that same calm face. He saw Kyle and gave a soft smile. "You came." Kyle nodded. "Yes, sir." Mr. Henry handed him an apron. "Then let's work." For the next few hours, Kyle did things he never imagined doing. He washed dishes, served soup, and listened to stories from people who had nothing, but still smiled. He saw a little girl hug Mr. Henry tightly and say, "Thank you for the warm blanket." Kyle felt something inside him shift. Later, when the crowd left and the cleanup began, Kyle finally asked, "Why do you do all this, sir? You could live rich. Fancy houses, big cars. You helped so many people. Why are you here?" Mr. Henry sat down on a wooden bench, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked out the window and said, "I wasn't always poor, Kyle. A long time ago, I owned land, businesses, and even gave money to start restaurants like Royal Spoon. But when my wife died, I lost everything, not just money, but heart." Kyle listened quietly. Mr. Henry continued, "One night, I came here, this very street. It was raining. I saw people hungry, wet, crying. I had two choices, hide in pain or help someone else. So you helped?" Kyle asked softly. "Yes, I gave what little I had. First food, then clothes, then time. And you know what happened?" Mr. Henry smiled. "They helped me back. Their smiles, their strength, that healed me more than money ever did." Kyle looked around the shelter. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell the restaurant who you were when you came in?" Mr. Henry looked at him. "Because real worth doesn't need to be announced. I wanted to see how people treat someone without a title. And you showed me." Kyle looked down in shame. But Mr. Henry touched his shoulder. "And then you said sorry. That matters, too." Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up outside the shelter. A man in a sharp blue suit stepped out. Reporters followed behind him. Kyle and Mr. Henry went outside to see. It was Mr. David Clark, the son of the restaurant chain's founder, the same man who had honored Mr. Henry at Royal Spoon the day before. "Mr. Henry," he said, shaking his hand, "I brought something for you." Reporters took photos as workers pulled out a large covered object from the back of the van. They lifted the cloth. It was a golden plaque. Mr. Clark read the words out loud. "To Mr. Henry, the man whose heart built more than walls. The man who fed souls and changed lives. Your kindness is the foundation of our success." Mr. Henry stood still. His eyes became wet. The people from the shelter came outside. Some clapped. Some cried. Mr. Clark continued, "From today, Hope Haven Shelter will be renamed Henry's House of Hope. We'll fund it forever, and every restaurant we own will have your story on the wall." Kyle couldn't believe it. All this time, this old man, quiet, humble, had changed more lives than any rich businessman ever could. Mr. Henry shook his head and smiled. "I didn't do it alone. I just treated people the way I wanted to be treated." And for once, the cameras didn't just catch a famous man or a big speech. They captured something bigger: truth, respect, and the power of a simple heart. Kyle knew he would never forget this day. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the shelter, now renamed Henry's House of Hope. Inside, the mood was warm and full of joy. Children played in the corners. Volunteers served fresh food. And the walls were now decorated with photos of Mr. Henry feeding the hungry, helping strangers, and smiling among people who had nothing but each other. Kyle stood in one corner, quietly watching it all. He still wore the apron Mr. Henry gave him. But now, it wasn't just a piece of cloth. It felt like a symbol, a reminder that true respect is shown through actions, not words. Mr. Henry walked beside him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Here," he said, handing one to Kyle. "Sit. You've worked hard." Kyle sat on the bench next to him. I still can't believe how wrong I was. Mr. Henry took a sip. You judged me, yes. But you didn't walk away when the truth came out. You stayed, you worked, and you listened. Kyle looked down. I feel ashamed. Good, Mr. Henry smiled gently. Because that means your heart is still soft. Across the room, some of the restaurant staff had come in. They were donating food and blankets. Even Mr. Clark had stayed. He was speaking with one of the shelter workers about building a proper kitchen next month. Kyle looked around and said, I used to think success was about money, fame, fast cars, fancy clothes. Mr. Henry smiled again. And what do you think now? Kyle's voice lowered. I think success is being remembered with love, being missed if you're gone, making people's lives better, even a little. Mr. Henry nodded. That's what my wife used to say too. Kyle was surprised. You were married. For many years, Mr. Henry said, eyes soft. Her name was Grace. Kindest woman you'd ever meet. This place, this whole mission, was her dream. I'm just living it for her now. A silence fell between them. Then Mr. Henry said, do you want to help me full-time? Kyle's eyes widened. You mean work here? Mr. Henry nodded. We're opening 2 more shelters soon. We need young people, people with a heart, people who've made mistakes and want to grow. Kyle felt his heart race. Yes, I'd love to. Mr. Henry smiled, his eyes shining. Then welcome to the family. Outside the shelter, something else was happening. The media had spread the story of Mr. Henry. People around the city were talking. News channels aired his story. Social media was full of photos of him in his apron, standing humbly with the plaque from Mr. Clark. People who had once ignored the poor now wanted to help. More volunteers started arriving. Donations poured in. Even those who had laughed at Mr. Henry at the restaurant now came forward to say sorry. One woman, who had whispered rude things before, walked into the shelter with 2 bags of fresh clothes. She looked at Mr. Henry and said, I judged you. I'm sorry. I want to help now. Mr. Henry smiled. There's always room to begin again. And that's what the story became. A message of change, forgiveness, and hope. It wasn't about race. It wasn't about money. It was about kindness. Pure, simple kindness. And how one man's quiet strength made the world stop and think. Weeks passed. The shelter, Henry's House of Hope, was no longer a quiet, hidden place on Maple Street. Now, it was a symbol. Every day, people walked in, not just to receive help, but to give help. The once cracked walls were now freshly painted. New beds lined the rooms. A small library stood in one corner. A new kitchen was being built. The shelter even had a small garden full of flowers and vegetables. And at the center of it all was Mr. Henry. He was the same. Still wore simple clothes, still served food with a gentle smile, still spoke kindly, even when tired. But now people looked at him differently. With respect, with gratitude, with love. One quiet Sunday morning, Mr. Henry was sitting outside on the shelter's front steps. He held a small photo in his hand. It was of him and his wife, Grace, smiling together under a tree long ago. He looked at it with soft eyes. I hope you're proud, he whispered. Just then, Kyle stepped outside, holding 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside Mr. Henry and handed him one. Morning, sir. Morning, Kyle. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the street come alive. Children played. Cars passed slowly. A group of volunteers were arriving with fresh supplies. Life had changed. Kyle looked at Mr. Henry and said, You know what's funny? I used to think real power was money, fame, titles. Mr. Henry smiled. And now? Kyle pointed toward the shelter. Now I see it's in serving, in healing, in giving people a second chance. Mr. Henry looked proud. You've learned well. Just then, a long black car stopped outside. The door opened. A man in uniform stepped out, an officer from the mayor's office. He held a small wooden box in his hands. He walked over and stood before Mr. Henry. "Sir," the officer said with a smile, "on behalf of the entire city and the mayor, we present you with the city's Lifetime Honor of Humanity Award. You have changed lives. You have lifted hearts. You have reminded us what it means to be truly human." Mr. Henry stood slowly. He took the box, opened it, and inside was a golden medal. It shined in the sunlight, but Mr. Henry's eyes were on the people gathering around him. Kyle clapped. So did the children, the workers, the volunteers, and even people walking by. The whole street echoed with applause. But Mr. Henry raised his hand gently. He smiled and said, "This isn't just my award. This belongs to all of you, because kindness is not done by one person. It grows when we pass it forward." Everyone stood quiet, listening. Mr. Henry's voice became softer. "I was once judged, laughed at, and told I didn't belong. But instead of fighting with anger, I chose love. And love brought me here." Kyle looked at him with wet eyes. "You taught us all something no school ever could." Mr. Henry turned to him. "Now it's your turn to teach others." That evening, as the sun went down, the shelter lights glowed warmly. Mr. Henry sat by the window, sipping tea, looking out at the world he had quietly changed. A world that once laughed at him, but now stood in silence, humbled by his kindness. And in that soft silence, one thing was clear. True strength doesn't shout, it shines.